All right, so today we're going to be going over how to structure an upper body day in the weight room, a lower body day in the weight room, and then a total body training day in the weight room. So we're going to go over all three of those days in depth. But first, before we start, we're just going to do a quick overview of how to structure a weight room session. So I went over this in another video in depth. It's on the Performance Center. So if you want to learn more about each of these two parts at the top, check it out. But first, we're going to start off with a warm-up. After we get done with our warm-up, we're gonna get into our primer. And then when we get done with our primer, we're ready to go for the lift. We're gonna get into our lift. Now, when it comes to the lifts that we do in the weight room, there's three ways that you can structure your tiers in the weight room. So following a tier system. Now, the tier system is just a way to structure and organize your exercises that you do to best fit what you're going for that day. So we have three different ways to structure a tier. And the first way, it's just a single tier. So you're just doing one movement in that tier. So in this tier, we're just doing a squat. When we get done with our squat, we move on to our next tier, which can be something like an RDO or whatever it is, but you're just segmenting each movement in its own tier. Now, this is gonna be best if you're chasing pure strength or pure output because you get all that recovery without the use of any filler or supersets. After that, we have our paired tier. So this is otherwise known as supersets. Now, the superset is where you do a movement first, and right after you do that first movement, you immediately go after to the next movement in that tier. So you do one set of here, one set of here, and you go back to the top and repeat for the reps and sets that you have. Now, this is best to use if you're trying to get more work done in less time, or if you're trying to maximize the output you get from movement here. So something like contrast pairing, post-activation potentiation, or just to maximize the second movement. Or it's really good to get a lot of capacity work in, so you're doing more work in less time. Then you have our complex tier. So this is going to be a tricep or more. So you're pairing more than three movements together in the same complex. So you do one set here, one set here, one set here, go back to the top and repeat. Now, complex tiers are going to be the best thing you can use if you're short on time, if you want to get a lot of work done, or you really want to challenge your ability to recover from repeated bouts and challenge your work capacities. All right, so now we're going to go over how to structure your lower body training day in the weight room. And your lower body day is going to be defined by three key movements. One's going to be the knee dominant movement, two is going to be a hip dominant movement, and three is going to be that unilateral movement that you do in the weight room. Now, to get further in depth in these, knee dominant movements are going to require your movements to be movements where your knee is doing the most of the work. You're getting most of your movement from the knee. This is movements like squats, lunges, split squats, things like that where your knee's the prime mover. Then two, the hip dominant work, this is going to be where your hip is the main joint that's working. So this is separated into two categories, a hinge and a bridge. The hinge is movements like your RDLs and your good mornings where your hips are acting like a hinge, and the bridge is movements like your thrust, glute bridges, things like that where you're really working from the ground. Then three, unilateral movements. So this can be knee or hip dominant, but this is going to be where you're working either solely on one leg or predominantly on one leg. And this is super important that it's a key movement. Unilateral movement is a key movement and not an accessory or a filler, because one, most of sport action is played primarily on one leg at a time. It also more closely mimics your gait, so how you're moving in real life, how you're walking. It also requires you to have more movement and create more stability around the ankle, knee, and hip, more core strength, and it just better bridges the gap between working in the weight room and getting that onto the field for performance-based reasons. Now, around these three key movements, we get into our fillers. So our fillers are really used to supplement the three key movements that we're working on. Now, fillers can be direct hip flexor work, so movements like a single leg hip flexor bridges, things like that. We also have our calf, ankle, and footwork. So this is like calf raises, TA raises, footwork, stability work, things like that. Then we have our adductor work. So again, our adductors are huge when it comes to performance, whether it be from stabilizing the pelvis when we sprint, to facilitating internal rotation or external rotation, because your adductors work in every single plane and in almost every single movement. And then we have our direct hip work. So this filler work that we're doing here is just going to supplement the three key movements that your lower body training day should be structured around. All right, so now that we understand the three key movements for a lower body day, we're going to go over how to put it together and structure your own lower body training day in the weight room. So we have these three separate tiers. Again, our knee dominant, hip dominant, and unilaterals here. Now we're going to work around this and fill it up with different movements. Now, to start, you could easily pair your knee and hip dominant movements together into one pairing. So let's move it like a squat paired with an RDL, but we're just not going to for the sake of this example. Now looking at your first tier, we have our knee dominant movement. Let's say we do a movement such as a squat. So that's gonna be the primary movement in our first tier. Now with this, we could put anything else in this if we wanted to. If we didn't, we don't have to. So say I just wanted to work on my squat and I really wanted to get the most out of it, lift the most weight possible, get the most out of it possible. I'm just gonna leave this movement here as is. So my tier 1 is just a squat. And in my tier 2, we get into my hip dominant tier. So I'm gonna do a movement like a bridge or RDL. Now for this, let's say for the example, I decide I wanna do RDL for tier 2. But I don't want this to stand alone. I wanna really maximize the work I'm getting from this tier, and I wanna utilize the posterior chain work, the heavy loaded posterior chain work, and put that into a jump to get a lot of output from it. So I might superset this RDL with a movement like a jump. So an RDL with a broad jump. That way I'm getting some contrast work in. So we have tier 1, our standalone squat. Tier 2 is our superset RDL with a broad jump. Now where do I go from here? I get onto my tier 3, my unilateral tier. Now for this, to say for the sake of the example, I decide that I really want to get a lot of direct work on movements that I'm weakened at. So muscles that I may be lacking in. So I do a unilateral movement such as a split squat. That's gonna be my tier 3, but I wanna make this tier a complex tier or a tricep. So I'm gonna add 2 movements to this tier. Now within this tier, say I'm lacking my adductor strength and I'm lacking some direct ankle strength. So I might superset this split squat with a Copenhagen bridge for the first tier, for the first filler, and my second filler might be like a split squat calf raise. That's going to make and complete my tricep. Now, again, this is just an example, but you see how I'm trying to structure this workout. It's based off around my 3 key movements. I'm getting those movements, putting them into tiers based off what I want to work, and I'm using my fillers to fill up and make supersets or triceps to get a lot of work done. Now, if I get done with these three key movements and I decide I want to do more at the end, I can easily make another tier and do other stuff that I might not get out of these 3 movements. So I might not get a lot of tibialis anterior work. I may not get a lot of glute medius work. So I may pair these last movements with taking a more localized approach to work on these filler workouts of the lower body that I really don't get to focus on in this. But either way, it's paired around these movements. I'm using fillers, and I can create a lower body day understanding that, hey, I want the base of my work to be revolved around these 3 movements. So in summary, when structuring a lower body training day, keep these points in mind. 1, create your workouts in your weight room training session around your 3 key movements: the knee dominant, hip dominant, and unilateral movement. 2, use your fillers for more localized work that you may be lacking or that you may not directly be getting as much as you want to from these 3 key movements. And then 3, use single tiers, paired tiers, or tri tiers as needed. If you want to lift the most weight possible, you might just use a single tier. If you want to get some potentiation work, you might do a paired superset of the same pattern. Or if you want to get some more capacity work, you may do a superset of different patterns. And then your triceps, you can use those to get a lot of capacity work, improve your ability to get repeated outputs, and also get more localized work by adding fillers into those sets.